Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. I got Georgia on my mind, baby, because we're talking about Georgia again today with our listener success story. We talked about South Georgia a couple weeks ago. Today, we're talking about the opposite end of the state. We're talking about North Georgia mountains with Mr. Adam Kirk. Adam, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are y'all?
I'm doing real good. Not as good as you, my man. I got your buck pulled up on the TV over here. We're looking at it. It's kind of distracting. It's a really, really nice deer. Jacob, how are you?
Doing well. Again, not as good as Adam, because Adam, you killed an absolute hammer. And you killed this buck last season, is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
All right, sweet. So, Adam, I want to kind of kick it off with you. First off, how long have you been a listener or a viewer of the show? And then how did you find out about the podcast?
All right. So I started watching. It was probably late 2022. I moved up here. I'm from Flatland in Middle Georgia, and I married my wife. Moved her back home, and I just wanted to start mountain hunting a little bit, but I had no ideas on what to do. So met a few guys up here, and I asked one of them. I said, "Hey, any tips?" And first thing he said was hunt uphill from the truck, and that was very good advice. And then also he told me, he said, listen to this podcast, and so his name's Austin Carpenter. He guides fly fishing for trout out of Raven County, Clayton, Georgia, Shady Creek Expeditions, if any of y'all are interested in that. But he turned me on to the podcast, and I binge watched everything I could once I'd located this deer and just soaked in all the knowledge.
Well, let's get right into this deer. So you said, it sounded like you had some kind of history with this deer, like how you found this deer. So, like, what's the backstory on this buck? I mean, did you have much history with him, and what did it all entail from locating the deer to actually killing the deer?
So, November of 22, I thought I'm going to go scout some of this public land and watch some YouTube videos for mountain hunting, and they stress saddles a lot. So I got on Onyx and found a saddle, and I said, I'm just going to go look at it, see what it's about. And, there was a lot of mountain laurel. The hike in was terrible, 1.2 miles and 1,100 foot climb. And I get up there, and it's nothing but hiking through mountain laurel the whole way up. And the top of this saddle was just kind of clear right on top of it. And there was a few little scrapes, nothing crazy, just some small scrapes. And I thought, well, I run cameras on scrapes at home back at the hunting lease, so throw a camera on it and see what happens. And left that camera for a week, and my brother-in-law wanted to go hike up there and look, so we just went up there and pulled the card out of the camera and brought it back. I think there was 7 pictures on it from a week, and nothing but small bucks, doe, and then picture of there was a blank picture, and then we walked up. So didn't think much of it, but we got to studying that picture that was empty, and could tell something had ran by the camera. The leaves was disturbed, and I caught right at the edge of the camera a foot of a deer, and I thought, dang, that's a pretty big foot. And I got to going back and forth, one picture back to the other to try to see any other differences. And right in the edge of the picture was a time, and it was a long time. And I thought, okay, well there's a deer with horns up here. And you talk to people, and they say, oh, you ain't gonna find nothing in the mountains. Stay down in flatland, and you'll have better luck. But that intrigued me a little bit, so I said, well, I'm gonna leave the camera to soak. And just being lazy, I never really went back and checked it. I left it up there for 10 months. Came back and pulled the camera, and was shocked at what I found. The month of December, the deer walked by that camera twice, or twice in daylight, and he was just an impressive buck. And I thought, all right, I need to figure out a way to hunt this deer, and started formulating the game plan of thinking, well, how am I going to get in here? Because the way I went in first was not, I couldn't imagine trying to get in there before daylight. There was one point where, you walk up to a creek that you actually have to climb. I don't want to call it a waterfall, but it's a waterfall about chest high, and you had to climb up it to get in there. And I thought, I can't be doing that in the dark. So I actually started studying Onyx, trying to find different ways to get in, and I found another route. And I don't want to give too many of my secrets, and I don't know if it's going to be a secret, but there was a hiking trail that was not very far, and I thought, well, I wonder how far I can get in on that trail. And so I went and tried it, went and bought a couple cell cameras, and come in from the opposite side of the saddle, and getting up the hiking trail was, obviously much easier. It was a further walk, but it was more gradual. The path was laid out for me, so wasn't stumbling through the woods until I got to a certain point and broke off that trail. And you just diving through Mountain Laurel, and then I finally found some trails going through this stuff. And I think I was watching one of y'all's episodes, and y'all described bear trails in one of them, and I think that's probably what this was, because they were just wide highways going through the Mountain Laurel. And it put me out right on top of the saddle where these scrapes were, and I found some scrapes, put the cell cams on them, and just let them soak. And he finally showed back up late October, middle of the night, and that told me he was alive. He was still there. And I said, all right, well, I'm not going to go in there unless I have to until I get a daylight picture. And I think I had to go up there twice to replace antennas from bears getting the antennas off the cameras. And one time was during muzzleloader season, so I actually took a muzzleloader with me and just kind of poked around a little bit. But November the 4th, he showed up at midday on the scrape. And so I said, okay. I went back to the last year's pictures, and I had 2 daylight pictures of him in December. Both daylight pictures was between 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock midday. And then when he showed up the following year, it was like 1:53. So I said, okay, that's a clue. And I always went up there. I'd try to get up there right at daybreak or before daybreak, but I'd always sit until at least 3:30. Never got down until 3:30. And after he showed up November 4th, I sat for him 6 times and killed him. But every time I went, I saw deer. So that was a plus, low deer density area, but I only saw does. I saw one other little buck. He come from the top side of the mountain. The way it lays out is, just imagine a single mountain, and then, just a saddle runs off. Well, it's pretty high elevation, and just nothing but mountain laurel everywhere you can see, just little holes here and there. And the buck, he came from, let's say, trying to picture it in my head, the northeastern side of the mountain, and the saddle kind of ran south. And so he came out of the laurel down that saddle and just skirted the edge, went on around the mountain. Well, that was the only buck I'd seen from the stand. And I was hunting to where whenever I'd come through that laurel and pop out in the opening, it was probably a opening. It was only 50, 60 yards wide in the laurel, but it was looking up the mountain, and it got gradually wider as you could. Up at the top of the mountain, you might have had a 75, 80 yard, opening in width. And that was pretty much all you could see. But every time I went, I saw does coming out of that laurel. And after watching some other videos, I think, and exploring a little bit, I found that there was a doe bedding area in that laurel. It would have been downhill to like the east, just down in there. So I thought, okay, doe bedding there. And, that's really all I knew. But he showed up again, 11:53 midday on November 29th. Well, I took, everybody said you need to take off the week of Thanksgiving or the first week in December to hunt the rut up here. And I thought that's new to me because it's just a little later up here. So I took off the 30th through, I think, the 5th of December, say. And he showed up midday on the 29th of November. Generally, if I got a picture of him, he wouldn't show up again for a week. Kind of went back to hearing the guys talk about the mountain deer running circuits. Made me kind of think that too, just because if you saw him once, you really didn't get another picture of him for a week. And I was kind of bummed out about it, but I said, well, I'm still going to go. But that morning I got to the stand, right at daybreak, and the wind, it was in my face, but the forecast was it was going to swap 180 degrees at 10 o'clock. And I thought, well, I don't really know where he's at. I don't know where he's coming from. But if I sit in this tree and that wind swaps, it's going to push the wind right up the saddle, right up the top of that mountain, right where I'm looking. So I just took my time. I took the stand off the tree, and late November, the leaves were super loud. And, for all I know, he could have been bedded 100 yards from me somewhere. So I just inched up the mountain and wouldn't move unless the wind was blowing. And finally, by 8 o'clock, I got kind of to the top of to the point on the mountain to where I was slipping to take a step. It was so steep. I thought if I can get to the point where I don't think a deer will come behind me, maybe I'll be okay with the wind. And I picked a tree and climbed it, and I could actually see a good bit more than what I had normally seen. And right at 10:30, right on the dot, the wind shifted, and it was hitting me in the face. And I said, okay, well, we're good if he's going to show up. And luckily, not that morning, there was didn't see anything. No deer come out in front of me or nothing. Didn't get winded that I'm aware of. But I tried some grunts. It was right at lunch. I tried some grunts, and one of your other videos, a guy had talked about spraying at your estrus scent above your head. So I thought, well, I'll try that too, and I'd sprayed some up there. But the way the spot laid out is another episode talked about an edge within an edge. So it's a large laurel thicket just right in that center on that saddle. There was just heavy laurel edges on both sides, trails coming out of them. I really wish you could see the topo of it, because it made more sense. But 12:45, I hear a deer coming up from over my left shoulder. If you're looking at it on the map, the northeast side of the mountain. And I look up and over my shoulder, and I see him coming right to me. And he ended up right at the base of the tree, and shot him with the rifle just straight down, literally straight down. And it was just an unbelievable experience. And if it hadn't been for watching those videos that explained the thermals and me thinking about what the wind was going to do and how the thermals were going to affect it that morning, if I'd have stayed in that stand, I know he'd have smelled me, because the wind was hitting me in the face. So it was kind of a wind out of the southwest, I'd say. It was kind of, if you're looking out on the map, the wind was blowing over the left edge of the mountain. He came from the right edge of the mountain. But I'm sure, some of my wind would have still went to that right side, and he would have probably never came up through there. But where I was at, he came from the left side of the mountain. The wind was blowing to the right side. And if I hadn't have done that, I feel very strongly he'd have never came. But that's pretty much the rundown in a gist.
Adam, I want to kick it way back to something you said in the very beginning. There's a lot of stuff there that I want to get into, but one of the first things you mentioned is you grew up in more of like a flatland type environment. I think you said you had a lease down there. You were hunting some private land. Judging by you got some pretty nice bucks on the wall behind you right there. So it seems like you did pretty good down there. What was the change up like going from that flatland? What made you even want to go to the mountains? Like, was it just you moving up there, or did you get a wild hair and want to go climb a mountain?
Well, a little bit of both. Now I'm an hour and a half away from my lease, and before we moved up here, I could ride the 4-wheeler to it. So I'm an avid hunter, and I said I want to find somewhere up here. If I get off work in time, I want to have somewhere to go. And so I just started with that idea of just finding somewhere that I could go see a deer. Had no anticipation of ever finding a deer like that here. But just the very first spot that I scouted, it was a God-given thing. I went up there. That was the first place I put a camera, first scrape I found, and you find a deer like that. So I wouldn't say there was much skill in locating the deer. That was a God-given thing, a God-given gift, to give me the ability to find that deer. That was nothing to do with me, but then after that, the work began on trying to figure out how to kill him. And I didn't hunt much at the lease last year. Needless to say, I stayed up here close to home and focused all my efforts on killing him.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I also want to ask about the mountain laurel specifically. So you said that it's a pretty nasty climb to get to this spot. Do you feel like? Well, I guess my first question actually is: were there other people hunting the area, or did you have this all to yourself due to the steepness and the thickness and the access?
All right. So on the camera, I actually got pictures of 2 different individuals, but they never saw the camera, from what I could tell. And one of the pictures, one of the bears had actually got the camera, and it was hanging upside down, so I couldn't really see if the guy was looking at the camera or not. But there was actually 2 hunters that walked by the camera. At least one guy was in blue jeans and a camo jacket with a rifle, and then the other 2, you could tell they were hunting. But they could have been bear hunting. But as far as actually running into other hunters, I know of after the fact, I found out about one other gentleman that was hunting some private land very close by that had some pictures of him. But other than that, I think I was on my own. But one interesting thing that it's just another little tidbit of the puzzle that I'm going to use next year to see if it works. But the hiking trail that I was using to come in on after I'd located him was a very popular trail. And this spot I was hunting was not 100 yards off that trail, but it was just super thick to get to it. And, I wonder if, that maybe helped a little bit, because this deer was obviously he was smelling human scent. If somebody walked by that trail and he's standing on that saddle, the wind's blowing right, he's going to smell them. But I was wondering if he felt safe in that laurel back secluded in there. And I just wonder if that kind of helped with the fact of, I didn't bump him out of there any of the times I went in, or if I did, it didn't bother him enough to actually move him. He'd come back. So that's a interesting thing that I'm going to use going forward to see if it keeps working. Because like I say, he was 100 yards off a very popular hiking trail.
That kind of reminds me of Adam and Heath Jolly. Your interviews with them?
Yeah, it reminds me of some other spots though.
Oh,
That's interesting thought there, Adam. Well, by the way, you mentioned one thing about the spot, talking about having Mount Laurel. It seems like it was on both sides of the saddle, like real thick. So a podcast guest, I don't know if you ever listened to this episode. You probably did if you went through trial the mountain episodes. It's a long time ago, but a mountain classic for any new listeners. It's episode 133, Hunting Southeast Backcountry Whitetails with Devin Duncan, our buddy Devin Duncan from Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
And he talks about, in that episode specifically, like finding some of those saddles like that. Like those are the saddles that he says like he has like the most success in, and he doesn't always hunt saddles, but it's like if you can find a saddle where it has at least laurel on one side of the saddle, where it kind of comes up close to the top of the saddle, and preferably on both sides, that it's just one of those easy spots that like all these deer are working, they're bedding in those saddles, or they're bedding in that mountain laurel, and they're crossing up to that saddle or paralleling that saddle on the edge of the mountain laurel and having a lot of success there. And it's interesting you were able to go and find one of those spots and again, key in on it and find all that buck sign in and around that saddle, which is pretty cool. Also, you mentioned the thermals and everything, but like, what are some of those, let me say this. You're also mentioning early on in the story that, you're watching some YouTube content, some of our stuff and other people's stuff, talk about finding saddles in the mountains. Is there anything like based off like what you've learned from this experience and like, after, kind of being, I guess it's 2 seasons in this area, anything you've looked at to try to replicate this in other spots and trying to find other areas where you have more options potentially?
Well, the only other spot that I've really tried to go look at, I found a good bit of sign, but there was a lot more human sign too. I actually had a camera get stole off that spot. And the only difference I can tell is it was a little flatter. And I think what I'm going to do is key in on similar spots like that one that are, harder to get to. Cause I think I'm just going to key in on still trying to get away from the lazier people, I guess you'd say. Cause I mean, somebody that wants it bad enough, I'll get in there with them, but, keying in on that is I think I'm just going to look for similar stuff. I haven't really tried yet to find another area, just like that. Just last year, after I killed the deer, I started looking, and I found that one other spot. But then once the camera got stole, I said, "No, I'm done. I'll move on somewhere else." But other than that, I haven't really looked around much more up here.
So let me ask you this. Based off now you kind of going back through and listening and watching some old podcasts that we've done, because, we're over, by this time this episode's come out, we're over 600 episodes at this point. And we've done, I feel like we've done quite a few on mountain hunting in different areas of the South, all the way from, Virginia, West Virginia, all the way across to Arkansas and Georgia, especially Georgia, covered Georgia a good bit, and even North Carolina. Has there been any specific conversations with mountain hunting that's like clicked with you, or maybe giving you a little more inspiration or thought process for going out there and trying to do this and have more confidence while you're hunting the mountains after not having a ton of experience doing this previously?
I don't know about anything that builds my confidence, but I know one episode that sticks out that I think about is I think the guy was in Pennsylvania. I may be wrong, but he was talking about hiking miles into these places, just going farther than anybody else would be willing to go. And I remember that one stuck with me, is just trying to get in there and get away from everybody else. And I think that may be what has helped me in this spot, because it's not that far in there if you're coming in off private. But if you're somebody that, like me, that didn't have that private access, you're going to have to walk a good ways to get in there. And I want to go back in there and actually go farther, because this particular trail, I want to say it's like 11 miles before there's the next spot to actually get off the trail. So it's it's almost like the Appalachian Trail, but it's a smaller version that's here in the county.
Yeah.
They might be saying too much, but I want to get up in there and actually go a little farther, kind of like that guy said. Because I remember one tidbit that he said, it backed up to where he said he found a deer way back in there, but it was backed up to a subdivision or something. And there's some places in there kind of like that I'd like to go try to look at.
So that guy you're talking about is our buddy Paul Putera, and the episode I think you're referencing where he's talking about covering a bunch of ground. That's episode 303, dry ground buck tracking with Paul Putera, and he definitely does that. I mean, that dude. If I had to put money on someone outworking somebody else, it probably would be Paul, because he's not afraid to walk and cover ground and find where a buck's actually spending the most amount of time. So that is a really good point, and that's one of those things that's like, to me. And maybe you can put some perspective on this, like the advantages of having like again OnX, and it just even like having like a secondary GPS, having more confidence knowing where you're going and also knowing where you're at all times outside of just using a compass. I think it's giving more and more people more confidence to do that kind of thing versus 15, 20 years ago when you could get, especially like 15 years ago, you could get a GPS, but like it just wasn't commonly used. So it was a lot more just kind of wandering out using a compass and figuring out your way back to the truck and marking trees, whatever it had to be. But now it's like, it gives us a lot more confidence for all of us to be able to go out there and be able to walk further and cover more ground, because we understand how we need to get back to the truck. As long as you got your phone charged and you got maybe a battery pack in the backpack, and you're good to go on the way back out. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Because when I first came up here, I was kind of intimidated by these mountains, because I'm an avid turkey hunter too, and that was the first thing I tried up here. And I was just like, if I hear a bird gobble on my lease, I just go straight to the bird. Can't do that up here. You've got to pick a route, and not without OnX or Hunt Stand or another one of these GPS apps. I would be nervous to try it. But I tell you, before y'all's podcast, I was an avid Hunt Stand user. And then after I watched one of y'all's videos, it was talking about slope angle shading. That one, that swapped me to OnX right there. And I've used that more up here than anything else, planning paths to walk and access to getting into certain little areas. I've used that a good bit. It hasn't led me astray yet. I've used it. There was one spot that was really steep, and I was trying to make a shortcut, come back down the mountain, and I looked at it to find the less steep spot, and I still ended up sliding down on my bottom, but it really helped, because most of it was like the cliff bluffs and stuff like that. That one of those episodes was talking about with slope angle shading.
Absolutely. By the way, Adam, did your taxidermist or anybody ever put a tape on that deer?
So gross, you want gross or the net?
I mean, nets are for fish, man. What's that gross score?
That's what I say too. 155 and an eighth.
Okay.
All right. Dang, man. That's my kind of deer right there.
Got main beams for days.
Oh, yeah, that second picture we got up on the screen, which, again, I'll cut these into the video for the viewers. Man, that main beam, like how you're holding him up, you can just tell how long that main beam just keeps going. It's crazy.
27-inch main beams.
Yo!
That's the same on that velvet deer. And that velvet deer I killed, it's all main beams.
Dude, I mean, he ain't nothing but beams.
That's insane. Yeah. So, I mean, let me ask you this. What's like some of your biggest takeaways from this hunt and like this experience with this buck that, again, maybe gives you more confidence moving forward, maybe locating other deer? I mean, kind of walk us through your thought process as you're getting prepared for this season.
Well, I guess the biggest takeaway for me was, growing up, maybe from where I was from, you thought of this particular county as just being a wash. There was no big deer in this county. And you even talk to the people that have lived there here their whole life. You get the handful once you get in, get to know some folks, and they say, oh yeah, there's big deer here. But the general population of the county, there's they just go south to go hunting, and they're here. You just got to put in the work to find them, and that's really been the biggest takeaway for me with this is just knowing that they're here. You just got to find them, and I'm gonna apply I'm gonna go up there and I'm gonna put a camera right back where I had it to see if anything else shows up, and then keep looking for similar spots and see what I can mirror from this deer into the other one. That edge within an edge has really been the biggest thing that has stuck with me, and I kind of like it. It's because that particular spot, somebody could walk 100 yards to the left of it and miss it, and I don't know if that would really make a difference in hunting the area, but finding those little spots like that, I think, are what I'm going to try to key in on in the upcoming year. Just finding the sign finding the sign in these smaller spots that could be easily missed.
By the way, Adam, that first episode we ever did on the topic edge within edge is episode 129, DIYing for public land giants with Greg Staggs. Greg's from Missouri, and he brought that up in great detail with us. And again, it can be super effective. It's just one of those things. It's hard to see that. Like, it's really hard to see it on aerial imagery. Cool thing is with leaf-off imagery, you can see that mountain laurel kind of underneath the hardwood canopy. So you can kind of pick some of that stuff out, but a lot of it, you got to be boots on the ground. So that's awesome that you've seen success hunting and focusing on the edge within the edge. And again, Greg was a great resource on the episode 129. Adam, as a point of wrapping up, again, greatly appreciate you hopping on here and kind of talking to us about everything with the story and the deer. You got any exciting plans for this fall, as in scouting, expanding your territory, put some more cameras out the whole 9 yards?
I'm gonna stick with the lease, but for another year or two at least. If I can duplicate, something similar up here again, I'll probably just stick to my hunting up here. It was so much more rewarding. I say it was my first public land deer. That's not quite true. I did kill one on a state park hunt one time, but that's the first big deer, mature deer that I've ever killed on public land, and it was just so much more rewarding. And I don't know. I really enjoyed it. It was, I've got these that are hanging in here are the ones that didn't make it in the living room. I mean, I've got some decent deer, but that one was the biggest, and it come off public land. So I was, just the thrill of that. I'm excited to try again. And, there's a bunch of people that say, oh, well, that's a deer of a lifetime up here. You won't never kill another one like that. And every time I'm thinking I want to prove you wrong so bad, and I'm going to go out there and try to duplicate it.
Awesome. So, heck yeah.
Yeah,
dude.
man, that fires me up.
Absolutely.
Make them eat their words, man.
Yeah. Well, Adam, man, we appreciate you hopping on for this segment of the podcast. Again, listeners, viewers, stick around for the second segment on this outro episode. We kind of do some Q&As and going over Monday's episode. So, Adam, thank you again for joining us, and best luck to you this season.
Thank y'all. Y'all have a good one.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap up our listener success segment for this podcast, talking with Mr. Adam Kirk of North Georgia, who we just saw at the Georgia Outdoor News Outdoor Blast this past weekend. Jake, what'd you think of that?
It was fun watching. So he was in the truck buck shootout and got to shoot for a truck. Made it to one of the final rounds before, again, getting out. But it was cool because we used to have this in Alabama when AON was a thing.
Yep.
Alabama Outdoor News. They had the truck buck shoot at the World Deer Expo, and it was always super cool to watch it. And actually, one of our buddies and past guests, Alan Summerford, actually won the truck one year in the truck buck shootout like 9 years ago in Alabama. So it was cool to see that. And I'll be honest, probably one of the most stressful situations.
Oh,
because
yeah.
you're shooting in front of like a group of there's probably 300 people in the stands, maybe more.
Yeah.
And then you have all the competitors, and you have to shoot on a podium. And you start out with a clay pigeon, clay target, and then you work all the way down to the final rounds, going to shooting an egg.
An egg at 60 feet with a pellet gun.
Well, if they make it to 60 feet, and they did make it to 60 feet.
Yes,
this year.
they did.
And iron sights, it is so stressful. Actually, I talked to the winner, David Shepard, and I was like, what was more stressful? Because he shot a real big deer to get into the competition. I'm like, was shooting the deer more stressful or shooting in front of everybody more stressful? He's like, 100% the competition. Shoot. He's like, it was nerve-wracking because you just got so many people looking at you. Plus, again, they're like filming it. Plus, it's for the chance to win a truck. It's a lot.
And the truck's sitting right there in front of you.
Yeah.
It's sitting right there off to the side of the stage, and you're sitting there like, man, I could drive that home tonight if I could just shoot this egg.
You could. I'm interested in seeing actually if David kept the truck, because you get a choice to keep the truck, or I think they may do like some kind of cash value or something for it, or like trade-in.
Wow.
So, because he said he had a brand new Ford. It only had like 30,000 miles on it, and he's like, I don't know if I want to get rid of that truck. And I'm like, okay.
Interesting.
I'm like, okay.
But either way, you're getting a free truck. You sell it.
Yeah, get a free truck for sure. So, anyways, it was cool to see that. But yeah, I got to see Adam Adam Kirk at the event at the expo. Got to meet a lot of other listeners. Some we've never met before, but are longtime listeners of the show, which is pretty cool.
Some that we like recognize from either YouTube comments or Facebook comments, or they've written into the show. Patreon. Yeah. And we got to meet a bunch of those guys. That was fun. And the truck buck thing was fun to, all I could think about when the guy won the truck was like, man, just think about that. You already killed like 150-inch deer or whatever it was that he killed last year. And now you just want a truck. Like, you already had bragging rights with all your buddies. And now you're just like, you're rubbing it in, man.
Stacking it on.
Stacking up the W's.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of ridiculous.
It is. But, I mean, it's a cool opportunity. But, yeah, I got to meet a bunch of people at the show. It was a really good time. And, listen, I'm not a Georgia Bulldog fan, but we had Jake Fromm, quarterback from Georgia, right next to us. And I got to talk to him for a little bit. And it was kind of cool seeing him, his meet and greet. He was telling me a little bit, his passion for hunting and fishing, and, like, how playing football kind of it kept him from doing it as much as he wanted to.
Yeah.
But he's like, yeah, man, after, game Saturday night, he's like, I'd wake up Sunday, drive down to our, our lease down in South Georgia and go hunt like all day Saturday or all day Sunday. And then he said his favorite thing was taking some of his buddies, some players on the team who's never hunted, never fished, and like go help them, like either shoot their first deer or go experience some of that or go catch, some fish. And he's like, it was awesome, like watching them like have that connection to the outdoors that they might not have ever had because they're not from that kind of area.
That's
so
cool.
I was like, that's pretty sweet. But yeah, he's a super nice guy. I was telling him on Friday, because he had a little line of he actually had a pretty good line of people on Friday trying to see him. I'm like, dude, Saturday, you don't get someone dictating this line because it's right here in front of our booth. So it's like, it was crazy, man. But yeah, it was a fun show. And trying to think some other takeaways. Oh, we didn't bring it on here. You and me walked out of that show, bought a couple custom knives, custom blades.
Oh, I didn't bring mine, dude. I'm fired up about this knife. My whole left arm is bald. I've been sharpening that sucker and testing it out.
Yeah,
it's not good.
Yeah. So, and actually, you bought a sharpener too, which is a pretty sweet
Dude,
sharpener.
okay.
You could link that down in the show notes below.
I will. It is the best sharpener. We get nothing from this company. I paid full price from this thing.
Yeah.
And I bought it at the show, but it's called a Warthog knife sharpener. And
links down below.
Links down below.
You check it out.
It is idiot proof, which I needed because I'm terrible at sharpening knives. And especially like the knives that we bought, it's a very, very hard steel that they use for it, which is good because you can work your way through like a whole deer or a couple deer without any issue. The only problem with a knife like that is that if you do let it get dull, it's very, very hard to get it back sharp again. At least if you suck at sharpening like I do. And but they had the sharpener there, and it's like a spring-loaded. How would you put it? It's like a V that you shave the knife down in, kind of like a handheld sharpener, but they're spring-loaded, and it comes with these little ceramic rods that you sharpen it against. That you sharpen the blade against, and you just run it through there like 20 times. You tune it to the blade.
We'll have to do a video or something.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but you tune the springs and everything to your blade. Like you just set it on there and you wait for both of the rods to like move at the same time as you draw the knife through. And once they move at the same time, you just run it through there. And we took it home, and Tiffany sharpened all of our kitchen knives with it. Right off the bat, got all those like razor. I'm talking about razor, sharper than I've ever. You can castrate a fly with these knives.
Well, you
dude.
told me something which we might not mention on the podcast, but he's like, yeah, you get this knife sharp enough, you could do some bodily trimming with. So anyway.
I'm not sure that's the word choice I would have went with.
Probably
there.
not the right word choice.
We're just gonna let that hang out there and let people try to figure out what the crap that means.
But yeah.
Anyways, it gets them super sharp. Very, very impressed with the sharpener, but we'll link it down below. I'm a sucker for like some custom knives.
Yep.
And you brought me over Jacob, he should have gave you a commission because you were like, you gotta come look at these, you gotta come. And so I went over there and looked at them.
I helped sold 2 knives, one to you and one to Andy.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, made some money off us. That's all right though.
Yeah.
It's a pretty slick knife.
And
So
that was Donnie Roberts knives.
custom knife maker.
Yeah, and I think he's on Facebook and everything. But dude, his we got the Stingrays. You got the bigger version. I had the smaller version, like the 3-inch blade. And dude, I'm excited to use it this fall. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, no, I want to go out and cut something up with it right now. So yeah, that was cool. We'll link that sharpener down below. It is probably my favorite thing that I've purchased in the last year and a half.
Yeah,
years.
you were straight up. You're like, when we got back, you're like, this is maybe my favorite piece of gear I've owned in a long time.
Yes, because I got a work sharp knife sharpener, like the little belt sander
And
thing.
what did Donnie say about that?
Oh, it was like a cuss word to him.
Yeah.
he's like, I said to him, I'm like, you probably don't like those, do you? He's like, no. Like Stone Cold, like didn't laugh or anything. He was like, I don't like those.
Well, again, he was talking about specifically because it takes off so much metal. It's truly grinding off that edge.
Yeah.
To get it back sharp again. And he's like, you'll destroy, especially like a really nice knife. You're going to destroy the blade after a while doing that. Versus that Warthog sharpener that you bought. And again, because it was one of Donnie's buddies, and when I bought my knife, he gave the knife to that guy Tony. Let him run my knife just a couple times just to get it honed, and then gave it to me. And I was like, this thing is scary sharp.
It's the sharpest knife I've ever owned.
Yeah.
For sure.
Scary.
Yeah, and there's no shavings. That guy was sitting there all day long, sharpening all these different knives, and there's no like shavings or anything on the table. There's no residue because it's very precise with how it sharpens. So yeah, it's a pretty slick little piece of gear. You could also sharpen broadheads in it, which is another reason I got it. You could sharpen like those tree sharks, which I'm not shooting those anymore, but you could sharpen something like that.
I guess you
in
could.
The sharpener.
Like a 2-blade fixed blade broadhead, you could.
Yeah, if you got like some iron wheels or something like that.
Yeah, you could probably run
like if you have a nicer 2-blade, you could for sure run these through that.
Yeah, you're probably right. That would be scary. I mean, it's in like the sharpness. I'll be honest. Like,
oh yeah.
But yeah, so that was really cool. I'm trying to think any other super big takeaways. The venue was really convenient. I'll be honest. They had a water water sports park next to it where they had like the pulley system for wakeboarding.
Yeah.
That was sick. Like I kind of want to go there. I can't wakeboard for any. Like last time I wakeboarded, it was really bad. Really bad. We grew up doing it, but I hadn't done it so long. I tried it like 4 or 5 years ago. Did not work out great. I became best way to describe it, I became like a deep diving crankbait. Flipped over that board, and the friggin' board was facing towards the boat, and I went. I went down.
You went down there, and found some structure.
Dude, I went down, dude. I was dredging the bottom. So yeah, but dude, it was such a cool venue with everything around there and all the baseball parks and everything. So that was really fun. But anyways, that was a great time. Great time meeting a bunch of you guys at that show. Appreciate everybody that came by and purchased some of the new hat apparel, and we're starting. I'll say this: I'm going to try to start doing some T-shirts.
Yes.
Some point this fall. So y'all stay tuned for that. But
yeah, that's coming this fall. And that was our last trade show of the year. So no more trade shows for us. I'm kind of glad. They're kind of exhausting. I have a good time at all of them, but man, it's like that's like all summer is there's the next trade show, then the next one, and now there's nothing between us and deer season. So hurtling full steam ahead at deer season. Pretty excited about that.
Speak about deer season. What's your thoughts on part 1's episode with Shane Parker and Michael Pike?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good episode. It was a timely episode because I know that I wanted to do it right now because I know that this is the time of year where everybody's out looking for velvet bucks, if you do that kind of thing. Some people don't scout until season comes in, and that's fine. But if you are the kind of guy who maybe you're trying to locate that target buck this year, maybe you're just trying to locate where bucks exist, where some bucks live. I wanted to do an episode that focused on finding them without using like a corn pile or something like that. Whether you hunt private land and that you're not allowed to bait on, whether you hunt public, or whether you do hunt private land that you can bait on, it's still good to know these things and maybe go pick up some of those deer that maybe aren't coming to the bait piles, or maybe are living on different parts of the property that you're not paying attention to so far. So I wanted to get it out this time of year, and then also specifically move into that early fall time frame and how to basically keep up with those deer, because a lot of people basically lose their bucks when the velvet comes off. And the going assumption is like, oh, this deer just left and he's 3 miles away and he's shifted home ranges. But like Shane talked about, maybe in part 1, might be in part 2, which is coming out Monday, that's really not the case. A lot of times, especially down in the deep south, some of them definitely do that. They definitely shift and they're just gone. But a lot of times they're only moving 100, 200, 300 yards, and they're just not walking in front of your camera anymore. But to you, if you're only relying on that trail camera, they just disappear completely and they're not in your life anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've heard that a lot with some past podcast guests about, it's great running trail cameras in the summertime, but it's also frustrating because when those deer disappear, you can't relocate them. It's kind of frustrating. It's like, oh man, had my hopes up, and then all of a sudden they're gone. I don't get another photo of them because you don't move the trail camera and try to relocate them. And one thing Shane will bring up, or has brought up, talking about how his strategy's changed a little bit about focusing on specifically this year of where they shift last year, and have his cameras already set up ready to roll. So when September gets here, late August, early September, and those bucks shift, he's already in their little core area of where he was catching them on camera last year. Because he said pretty much all those deer that he had on camera last year, all those big deer, made it. So he's kind of setting up those cameras really focused on that shift. So that's something interesting. And again, we kind of having that conversation about if you're hunting like a smaller acreage of private land versus a bigger piece of public land, or just a large piece of private, how challenging it can be, because like you might not have that much to really work with. If those deer do shift, if they shift 300 yards, that could be the difference of on your property, if it's a small piece of private versus the neighbor's property.
Yep.
It may struggle again, kind of getting those deer back on camera. So, but yeah, that was a really interesting conversation. But did you have anything else? Because I do want to get to some Q&As.
Not. There's a lot that we get into in part 2, I think, that is really relevant, that I don't want to like spoil it too much. Mm-hmm. But I did want to talk a little bit about the whole the understory, like the canopies and the north facing slopes. Do you remember who brought that up last year? Talk about early season hunting last year.
Drew Atkinson.
Yeah. So he brought up the exact same thing, and he hunts in the mountains of Arkansas. And he brought up the exact same thing because we interviewed him right before we went to Georgia, and he was like, yeah, you want north-facing slopes and dense cover, like dense leaf cover, dense canopy cover. But I hadn't heard it explained the way that Shane explained it, where he's saying that canopy essentially will hold a pocket of cool air, and that air won't get blown out by a breeze, which was kind of interesting. I've never considered that before. Mm-mm. I always thought you want something that has more of like an open understory, maybe with some cover nearby, but that open understory where they can get that breeze to cool things off. But I guess what he's referring to is they're kind of hanging out in lower areas that are going to have more of a thermal pull to them, and that smaller canopy, all the shrubs and saplings and whatnot, keep a breeze from coming in and basically moving that cold air out and moving warm air in that came from somewhere else.
Yeah, and then also, just as Shane talks about, be able to have a deer thermal regulate and keep themselves cool in those environments. And again, probably having a mix of both that denser cover on the north facing slopes that's going to hold that, it's going to be shaded for longer, the cool air is going to sit in that area, but also having maybe some open areas down low in the bottoms that they can kind of get out to, especially if it gets just crazy hot and they just need to get some better airflow. So I thought that was interesting, and like you said, never really had it explained in that kind of detail. I'll tell you something else he brought up in episode 1, because we got a bunch of questions about it. Mm-hmm. The SMZs, the head of the SMZs.
Oh yeah,
that was juicy.
Yeah,
we had a bunch of comments about it, especially on YouTube, and like how the tip of an SMZ as it is, that drainage. By the way, an SMZ, stream side management zone, the hardwood ditch running up specifically a lot of times in pine cover, where they cut the tops of these ridges off, and they have to leave a buffer around a lot of these drainages as it goes up on the ridge until there's a certain point they can cut across it. And those SMZs, the head of them, they're always, the best way to describe it's like a feathered edge, where it goes from like big timber that's in the SMZ to like shrubs to grasses to the pine thicket.
Yep.
And that being an area that not only a deer might want to use for bedding, but also for traveling, cutting that corner. It's just also a different type of habitat in amongst maybe like an open SMZ behind it, open drainage, and also like those super thick pine thickets. Mm-hmm. So that being like a really good place to put trail cameras. And again, I don't think we've ever really talked about that in detail on the podcast. I never really thought about it, but I think we're going to have a lot of listener success stories, maybe not necessarily just killing deer there, but getting bucks on camera if they go to shift their cameras the next few weeks to the head of those SMZs, seeing like what kind of activity they get in those spots. So if you're a listener or a viewer out there, And that topic that Shane brought up about focusing on the tops of those SMZs, the very tip of it, up against those pine thickets. If you put cameras there and start getting bucks on camera, let us know. I'd love to like just, kind of see what everybody else's, feedback is from maybe having some success doing that. But I thought that was really interesting. And just like, again, that habitat diversity. And it always seems like in a lot of places where we're at, the head of those SMZs, the very tip of them, is where you always seems to find like a really big white oak or red oak right there. Not always, but there's always a good chance you find one. And it's one of those spots that you think it'd be such a good spot to hunt. Okay. But you're also, as you're coming up that SMZ, or if you do like Scott Seals and you come out of the pine thicket, walk through the pine thicket and then get into the SMZ, you're surrounded, almost probably over 300 degrees by bedding. Like there's bedding all around you. So it's like there's such a good chance that with your wind swirling or kicking around that deer could come from 360 degrees around you.
Yeah. And
there's probably a really good chance you're going to get busted. But again, for inventory, kind of like Shane said, putting cameras in spots where I'm getting inventory, but it's not necessarily where I'm going to kill the deer. Like I'm not sitting over the trail camera. I thought it was a really good point with those spots.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was a really good point. And if you strip away all the cover off the landscape, if you strip away all the trees and it's just like dirt, in the hills and you're looking at everything, those SMZs, a lot of times there'll be a trail that kind of goes through that pine thicket that's running the edge that hits the top of all those. And I kind of brought this up when we were like doing the podcast, and it's the same thing if you have a long ridge with saddles on it. A lot of times, what I've found at least, is the trail that you find side hilling along that ridge is usually at the same elevation as the bottom of the saddle that you're going to go through. Or if it's running the side of the ridge, it's usually at the same elevation as the top of the ditches and or SMZs. So if you look at where all your SMZs like are going up onto a hill and they all end, like let's say the top of the hill is like 350 feet. And all these ditches or SMZs, I'm using those interchangeably, all those ditches or SMZs go up to like 320 feet of elevation. So not quite to the top of the hill, but they kind of peter out right there. A lot of times that trail is going to be running that elevation. And what I was saying to Shane is like, I kind of think of it almost like that's the highway, and then the SMZs are your exits or your road intersections. And when he brought that up, I like instantly thought about a couple different hunts where I've had bucks skirt me. When one of Scott's buddies was up there at the bus stop hunting there and shot that buck that morning, I was in the tip of that SMZ. He about blew me out of the tree when he shot because I was so close to him. But I was at the tip of the SMZ on the other side of those pines, and after he shot, I had a deer. I couldn't even tell what it was. It was so thick, but come and cut across the top of that SMZ. And the one I shot with my bow a couple years ago in that same place, same thing. And where I called in that hunter one time, same thing. I was hunting the tip of an SMZ. There's a big scrape right there at the tip. Big giant white oak, just like you were saying in that spot. So yeah, they're always really good spots. But you also brought up a really good point, which you just mentioned again, which is if you're walking up that SMZ to get to the tip of it, you just walked like right up into the middle of bedding essentially, because you're completely surrounded by deer. And a lot of times they're not just blowing out of there, running away. A lot of times you don't even know that you've bumped deer. And who was it that we were talking to not too long ago that was talking about that? He was hunting a smaller pine thicket, and he had a camera on the back side of it. Was it Kelsey Moss? And he didn't even realize he had bumped a deer, but he got a picture of the buck leaving out of the backside as he was approaching, because he had a cell camera on the backside. I think it was Kelsey.
Might have been Kelsey. Oh, it was. Yeah, it was his Tennessee public land buck he killed last year.
Yeah, so he got a cell cam picture of that buck sneaking out the backside as he was approaching. He didn't even realize that he bumped it. And so I think that happens a lot more, and that goes into what Shane was saying about putting your cameras in spots that you're not necessarily going to hunt, and they're just kind of gathering information for you that you can then plan the rest of your hunts based off of. Kind of like we talked about last week with the question of, do you over rely on trail cameras? Do trail cameras hurt your woodsmanship? And I think the general consensus is they can hurt your woodsmanship if you over rely on them, and if you use them in kind of a damaging way where you're just trying to hunt based off that trail camera picture. And I think what Shane drove home on that past episode was you're trying to use your cameras to just help you get a better idea of what the whole picture of what's going on in the area. It's not like you're going to go put your trail camera up in the tip of that SMZ and get a picture of a big buck and then go in there and kill him. That might happen, but probably not.
Yeah.
It's more like you're just seeing when he's in there, what conditions he's in there on, how often he comes through, and then you can use that to hunt areas around there that are a little bit easier for you to get in and out of without bumping deer. So what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, anytime, I'm trying to think if I've had any successful hunts going in and hunting like way up in SMZ.
I have not had many.
Yeah, I don't think of many, but again, for trail camera placement, it always seems like you get good movement there. But like kind of what Shane mentioned and what you just touched on, you're not hunting over that camera. You're trying to have multiple cameras in that area to figure out the travel path. And like, where's my best ambush point outside of like those quote unquote almost unhuntable spots? Like you'd have the conditions so right for you to hunt like the head of one of those SMZs, I think, in order to be effective. And it's probably gonna be like a one and done thing, as in like you're probably gonna have one or two really good chances, and then after that, it's gonna be really hard because the deer are gonna be educated. And it's also because there's so much thick cover around there, they don't have to blow or like really let you know that they're there. They just slip out like what Kelsey talked about in that episode with that buck. So it does make it challenging, but again, not relying on setting up directly over the top of your camera. It's more so about getting inventory, figure out path of travel, and like based off what you're getting on camera, how they're coming in, how they're leaving that location. Where's my best ambush point from that? Like, again, is it 150 yards to my right where there's another bottleneck? Is it behind the camera because they're walking past the camera going out to another spot? Like using that more so as, you know, an addition to your woodsmanship to figure out the right location to set up on instead of relying on sitting up directly over that camera.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we're going to get into a bunch more of that in part 2, which comes out this Monday. In the meantime, let's do some Q&As.
Okay, cool.
Let's do some Q&As.
Appreciate everybody submitting these new Q&As. Again, there's a link down the show notes and video show description on YouTube and on also all the audio podcast platforms. You can submit your questions there, and again, we'll answer those on these Thursday episodes. So appreciate everybody that's already been writing in some great questions, and it's always fun to kind of figure out, you know, what you guys have questions on and how we can go about either answering them or getting a podcast guest to answer them for us. All
right. I apologize if I mess up your last name here, but first up, we got Drew Dernberger, I think, from Southeast Missouri. He said, what is the most effective way to use trail cameras in swamp habitat? We don't have a ton of experience with that, to be completely honest with you, but the limited success that I've had in swamp habitat has been putting trail cameras on the water's edge where deer are, you know, running the edge of a slough or cutting around the tip of a slough, or beaver dams that cross large marshes, things along that line. Or, again, if you could find just a big community scrape. My mind also kind of goes to Jeff Baggett, who we had on the podcast a couple weeks ago, a listener / now podcast guest who we had on back when we were at the Eco Wild Expo in May, whose cameras we found on public land. There were a bunch of good spots, and he's had a bunch of really nice deer on camera. He got me and Jacob on camera, reached out to us because he recognized us, and we ended up, you know, talking with him. And where his cameras were kind of like that. They're on pinch points within the swamp, which is usually related to water in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, it's all travel corridors. I think all the guys that we've had on the podcast that hunt swamps, hunt big river bottoms, backwater areas, every camera location, just like, I mean, even in hill country, it's all based off travel corridors, in between cover, in between water, along the water's edge, stuff like that. So it's one of those things that if you walk out there, especially if you walk out there with like some knee boots or something, wherever the terrain is kind of dictating you to walk is more than likely where the deer are going to walk as well, both in the water and on the edge of the water. And you should be able to start seeing association of different signs, like big tracks. If, again, look for a good buck, tracks along with old rub lines and scrapes and everything, and placing cameras in and around those spots.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and actually to bring that up too, we scouted a swamp area last summer, put some cameras out on that place, and we specifically put them out on a beaver dam that crossed a marsh. And in this particular spot, this marsh also had a pretty nice trail running along the edge of it as well that had scrapes on it from the previous season. And that trail intersected where this beaver dam crossed the marsh. And it was just beat down, a lot of tracks. Put a camera there, and we wound up getting a whole bunch of does on it and some hogs too. We got a monstrous hog on that camera, giant hog on that camera, but mostly does. I think there was one maybe small buck that we got on there in velvet, and this was during the summertime. And looking back at that now, those woods were not like what Shane and Michael were talking about for locating bucks. Now this is obviously swamps, so we're not looking for like a north facing slope or anything like that. But that under canopy cover, those woods were actually pretty open underneath. They're open hardwoods, and then you had the marsh, which is obviously open and getting baked by the sun. So it's just a kind of a hot area. And looking back, there's some other places that had more of that mid-level canopy that were a little bit denser cover and, relatively close to where we put that camera out. That I feel like if we had moved a camera over there, we probably would have had a better chance of getting the bucks on camera.
Yeah.
But we kind of located a bunch of doe groups, a bunch of pregnant does. So, anyways.
Yep. And it's also like one of the spots, if you would have left the camera there all year and nobody messed with it, you might have seen a very specific window of time, kind of going back to episode 584 with Daniel Williams, seeing a time frame of when those bucks highly use that spot. Because clearly they'd use it a lot in the year, like the past year, and probably multiple years before that, just because it's such a natural terrain kind of funnel pinch point where there's multiple different paths of travel come together in one location. And you probably would have seen there's a certain date range of when those bucks are really using that location.
Yeah. All right, next up, we got Hunter Stroud from Tennessee. He said, so I've been hunting on this private 18,000-acre property called Ames Plantation for 2 years, and this will be my third. I've been seeing deer, but not as many as I would like. I shot a 135-inch deer last year. I wanted to ask your advice, what your advice would be on trying to find a bigger deer density. The property is very flat, and the deer rarely go out in the ag fields during daylight. Also, our property was hit pretty hard by CWD in 2020. I think he meant EHD.
Yeah.
Two different things. I just wanted to hear y'all's thoughts. Thank you. And he said thank you. So that property sounds awesome. And he also ended up sending the coordinates of it. I didn't show it to you, but it looks stupid good. Oh my gosh, it looks so good. He's got like ag fields mixed in. It's like 50-50 ag fields and timber.
Man, what's the guest policy like?
I was about to say, my man, killed a 135-inch deer out there. Come on. So the property looks really, really good on the map. I just very briefly looked at it, and it didn't look like there was a lot of cutover on the property or anything like that. So it's very much like mixed ag. It's not like agriculture up in the Midwest where it's just nothing but fields and there's little wood blocks. There's probably like a little bit more woods than there are fields here, but there's a lot of big ag fields. There's just bigger wood blocks in between all of them. And what immediately caught my eye on the property was there are some thicker looking areas, like maybe some CRP type fields where they've let it grow up with natural habitat, whether it be like grasses and forbs and shrubs and whatnot, just creating that cover that's visually obstructing. And I think I did see one clear cut. I don't know if it's on the property or not, but if it's 18,000 acres, depending on where you drop that coordinate, I'm assuming it probably was on the property. But even if it's adjoining the property, that clear cut's probably going to be holding a bunch of deer. So it's just going to 100% depend on where the cover is on that property, in my opinion. I wouldn't necessarily look at the ag fields. I would look at just the cover if you're trying to find like where all the deer are actually hanging out.
Yeah, I mean, covers the biggest aspect. Also, walking the property and looking for any kind of storm damage. I don't know if you've had tornadoes come through that area or straight line winds, big thunderstorms blowing down the canopies of some of these trees. But like, you should be able to find spots like that on that property where you can find an abundance of ground cover, where the tree canopy got opened up. It's a lot thicker on the ground. You might be able to see it on satellite imagery, you might not. And it can be extremely helpful if you find that kind of stuff. Long story short, just if you can find the best cover on this property just by boots on the ground, you're going to find the highest density of deer, without a doubt. If there's a big creek system that runs through the property, walk that creek system and try to find thick cover around the creek. That might be super helpful too. But again, storm damage, wind damage, if there's any clear cuts on the property or thickets like that, pay attention to that. But again, just associate the thickest cover and find that. If you find the thickest cover, you're going to find where the deer are spending a lot of their time, and not necessarily worrying a ton about food sources, because you have mixed ag. I'm sure you got a lot of oaks on the property. That's super nice to have, but finding that secure bedding cover, you're going to have a lot more opportunities at least documenting more of the quality of deer on that property.
All right, we got a pretty interesting one for the third one. This is from CJ Wilson in Maryland. He said, "Hey boys, longtime listener, love the podcast. My question is, I hunt a private ag farm here in Maryland, a sweet spot right across from my house. I turkey hunt and deer hunt, but the only way I can have access to hunt this farm is to help the farmer with summer crop damage hunting during the spring/summer months. I have a couple nice shooter bucks hanging on the property, but don't want to scare them away. Do you think I'm hurting my chances of them staying by doing this crop hunting damage? Obviously, I have no choice, but just curious if you guys have any advice. Thanks, guys." So he's got to go shoot deer in the summertime to help with the crop damage. So what's your take on that? What an interesting problem to have.
If the farmer's not with me, I'm just shooting does.
Yeah.
I mean, and the thing is, if you shoot does, there's going to be more does to move in off like the neighbors. So like, I wouldn't be that worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
I would try not to shoot in the bucks that I'm like potentially wanting to harvest for next year. That's something. It's interesting because I've heard our buddy Jonathan Bone, Catman Outdoors, Catman. He's done that up in Indiana for I don't know if it's a buddy, someone. He did a predation hunt sometime last year in the summer, maybe 2 years ago, and killed like maybe 5 or 6 does, something like that. But again, if that's what he needs help with, of course, help him. But I would just be very focused on shooting does and just realizing, especially because you have plenty of time in the fall, if you remove, say you need to take 20 does off the property, 20 deer off the property, there will be more does shifting into that property off your neighbors. So I would not necessarily worry about that. Same thing with the bucks. I mean, they're gonna relocate based off where the best habitat is. So if you're taking that many miles off the landscape that's eating a lot of the browse outside the ag, there's gonna be more deer shift in there. But yeah, I just try not to shoot any of the bucks. If you saw like one of your bucks that you wanted to really kill, I would be very cautious about shooting one of them.
Yeah, definitely.
Because the thing is, I think on the predation hunt, I don't think you get to keep the meat. I think you have to let them lay, at least in some states. I don't know if they're all like that, but
I don't know.
I've heard in some states, like if you shoot them on a predation hunt, you have to let that deer lay. You can't use it.
Oh wow, what a waste!
Yeah,
what a bummer. Yeah, that actually. When I first read the question, I was like, "Ooh, yeah, that kind of sucks." I feel like you'd push the deer off the property, but I don't think that's the case.
No,
now I'm thinking of guys like Alan, who we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, hammering deer,
who just absolutely lays the wood to some freaking does. I mean, they kill a lot of does on these properties. It's not like depredation or anything like that, but they're doing it in season, and he's still retaining. All these different bucks that he ends up killing pretty much every year on his property. He retains those deer, even with the amount of does. Now, you got to do it smart. Like, he's not going to his buck spots and killing the does. So, with them coming out on a private ag field, I don't know. But, you have experience with that Tennessee velvet hunt where, these deer were getting shot off these fields, and they caught on pretty quick. But
I don't know if they caught on to that or they're just caught on to more people just being out there before season came in. And like kind of harassing them, and they're like, "I just don't like this." But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily worry about spooking deer off the property because you're doing it probably midsummer. Mm-hmm. He's probably already been doing it, so like you have plenty of time for it to recover. Like I wouldn't worry about that. I would just not be shooting. If you see one of your target bucks, don't kill that deer. Kill some of the does.
Yeah. Well, what about and two also? What if your target buck's out there with some does? Like I wouldn't be shooting does right in front of my target buck. I don't know. I don't think he would leave.
If the thing is, if he has to do it in order to keep access to the property, you got to do it.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I don't think the bucks would leave.
No,
because they're just gonna be where the best habitat. is.
Just like the studies that we've looked at. They haven't had a study for depredation shooting, but like what Bronson Strickland talked about with us. Those deer are when they get hunted, it takes them roughly 5 to 7 days to kind of go back to their normal pattern. I think it'd be the exact same thing on that hunt. I don't think you're totally blowing the deer off that property.
Yeah. All right. You want to wrap up with a couple of reviews?
Yep. What we got?
We'll read one each. Let's see here. All right. You just pick.
So, by the way, appreciate everybody's been leaving us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But you can leave 5-star written reviews on Apple Podcasts. So we really greatly appreciate those. And we try to read those off when we get some new ones in. Currently, sitting at, let's see, 1,156 reviews. So appreciate that.
buddy.
All right, which one are you picking?
All right, I got to go with the one from Bramblin' Man because it's a little blast from the past.
Yep.
And Bramblin' Man's a great name. All right, he said, R.I.P. to the greatest intro and hunting podcast, 5 stars. Southern Child from the, I don't know how to say that word. Oh, man. Wait, no, he asked for, okay, you read it. He asked for you to read this one. You see which one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
All right, see, I don't know that word. I'm not going to make fun of you because I don't know that word.
Southern Child from the eponymous, whatever, a Southern rock album, which, Lordy, I hope the Ginger Bow Hunter is reading this, was written and originally performed by Little Richard in 1972. Despite how much butt it kicks, the artwork consisting of the picture of Little Richard making kissy faces while wearing a fur vest, no shirt, and milking a Halston. The album was shelved by Reprise Records and didn't see the light of day until 2005. The title track's brilliant 2020 cover by Blackberry Smoke just serves as further proof that what makes one Southerner ain't your...
That what makes one Southern.
Further proof that what makes one Southerner ain't your race.
Southern. It doesn't say Southerner.
Southern. Sorry. Make one Southern ain't your race, genre, hair length, or broadhead choice, but rather the grease in your groove and the honey on your tongue. I didn't pronounce it the way he had it. Your tongue. 5 stars. Appreciate that.
So yeah, what he's referring to there is our intro music on the podcast actually used to be the song Southern Child by Blackberry Smoke, which I listened to yesterday, and it's a banger. It's such a good song. I'm a Southern child, down in Macon, Georgia. Okay, that song is like, that was my dream song for the podcast intro. So I emailed Blackberry Smoke years ago, the band, and I was like, hey, can we use this for our podcast? And at the time, we were like pretty small. And they were like, are you going to put it on TV? And I said, no, we're just a podcast. And he was like, yeah, you can use it.
He didn't know what a podcast was.
They probably didn't care. And then as we got bigger and we were looking to incorporate advertisers onto the podcast and then the video, like things get complicated. And so now if we wanted to use a song like that, we quit using it for that reason. If we wanted to use a song like that, I think we'd have to like get some kind of agreement with them, which, hey, if anybody from Blackberry Smoke's listening, hit me up. I'd love to work something out with you guys. But that's why we quit using it, which it hurts my heart. I actually had someone, I wonder if it's the same guy, bring that up at the GON Outdoor Blast this past weekend. He was like, man, that was just the best intro. I was like, it was perfect. It was perfect for this podcast.
Next review.
All right. Let's see. I'll go with Dan the Deer Killing Man. He said, congratulations, 5 stars. Congrats to Andrew on getting to go full-time with the show. Don't know how it could get much better, but excited to see what's to come with both of y'all being full-timers. You just wait and see. We got some things planned, my man.
Yep.
Yes, sir. So, all right, that's going to wrap this one up. You got anything else?
Nope. Appreciate everybody watching the podcast. Appreciate everybody listening to the podcast. And we'll catch you back here on Monday's episode for part 2 with Shane Parker and the man himself, Mike Pike, a.k.a. The Dilla. So thank y'all for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you back here on Monday's episode from the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.